Okay, this is Gradye Parsons. I am the Stated Clerk of the General Assembly, and this will be the second in a series of podcasts about the future of the church, not just our church, but all of God's church as we experience it in this time and place. For some time now, I've been talking about Phyllis Tickle's book, The Great Emergence, which is a book that came out about 2 years ago that's talking about the trends and the sort of the expressions of church and how it may be changing based on sort of a cycle that she's seen in the church. It's every 500-year cycle. And if you think about it, roughly 500 years ago was the Reformation, and we're due for a Reformation. We're due for a changing in the church and due for a period. It's not just Phyllis. Paget, Cox, others have all talked about this. Eileen Linder talked about this in her research with the American Yearbook of Churches. It's a quantitative measurement that something is changing in the church. The way people attend church, the way people relate to church, the way what people are seeking in church is changing, and we need to try to understand this change and try to understand what it looks like inside our own congregations and what it looks like inside, of course, the Presbyterian Church. Now, Phyllis uses this example of an Anglican bishop's conversation where he talks about this change is like every 500 years the church goes through a giant rummage sale where it gets rid of bits and pieces of things that's accumulated over the years. But what I would rather use the image of is a wagon train from back in the 1800s. I'm told that if you follow the wagon trails, the Great Oregon Trails or the Chisholm Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, it'd be like following one prolonged yard sale. Because what happened is people would load up their wagons in St. Joe or St. Louis or wherever, and they'd head out west, and they'd put in those wagons Grandma's bureau and Uncle Ben's side table and all those kinds of heavy old furniture and try to go across the plains with all that stuff. And what they found out is that they could not move from A to B if they tried to carry all those things. Didn't mean those things weren't important or precious to them. Didn't mean they weren't going to need them when they got to the end. But it did mean they just could not move from the spot where they are to the spot where they needed to be unless they set those things aside. Now, they didn't put Grandma out in the prairie. They just put Grandma's bureau out so they could make the move from A to B. I think we're at a time in the church where we're having lots of discussions about what are those things we need to set aside for a while in order to move from where we are to where God's moving the church in the future. Some of those things may be difficult to talk about because they are precious to us, and setting them aside is a difficult conversation. But I think it's important for us to think about in our own churches, in our own spiritual life, in our whole life as a church Catholic. What are those things that we've acquired over the last few centuries, traditions, habits, that really could be set aside as we try to seek once again the fresh inpouring of the Spirit? So again, I want to encourage you to think about this conversation, to engage this conversation on the YouTube site. There's a place where there you can chat, and to think about it in your own place where you worship, and your own place where you gather with the people of God. What are those things that you need to carry with us as we move into the future, and what are those things we can leave aside for a while until we get to that place where God is calling us to be? Thank you, and I'll be talking to you next week.